Good afternoon for those of you in Britain. My name's Mick Napier and I'm speaking to you on behalf of the Scottish Palestine Solidarity Campaign. We aim to bring to an audience speakers that we think have something significant to say to contribute to a discussion of how to deliver effective solidarity to the beleaguered and these days extremely beleaguered people of Palestine. You can't stand up for anybody else if you can't stand up for yourself. If you can't defend your right to free speech, then your ability to deliver to the people of Palestine is limited. So this discussion is concerning the witch hunt in academia, which is still intensifying. The attempt to shut down dissident pro-Palestine voices in British and other universities. And today we're delighted to have three speakers with something each significant to contribute. David Miller, who's somewhere up there, I think he's on screen, he's just back from the swimming pool. And David was until recently working in the geology department at Bristol University. He's got a Scottish connection, of course, via Stirling University and Strathclyde, but now he is fighting his sacking by Bristol University and doing tremendous work with Palestine Declassified. Is that a weekly broadcast, David?
It is.
Framing excellent research. Other speaker is Dr. Muir Houston from Glasgow University, who himself is in the crosshairs of the pro-Israel lobby at the moment, and he'll talk about that. And how we can fight back. Our final speaker is Haim Bresheeth. Haim still works at SOAS and also is the author of the excellent book, An Army Like No Other, an analysis of the Israeli army and its relation to the wider settler colonial society. So a big welcome to all three of you. And a big welcome especially to our viewers, of course. Full disclosure, I'm not one of the speakers, but I was with others of our campaign on trial for alleged racism, alleged anti-Semitism arising out of BDS campaigning. I believe it was in fact for uttering the words "end the siege of Gaza," believe it or not. But the interesting thing is it arose out of BDS activity, and I think we'll find out in tonight's discussion the relationship between that BDS campaigning and a global, the Zionist, the pro-Israel fight back, and where we are at the moment trying to defend free speech rights in universities. I'll take David first, who'll tell his story and related points. Then we'll move to Muir Houston, from Glasgow University, and then finally the third speaker will be Haim Bresheeth from London. David, take it away. You've got 15 minutes, and of course there'll be time at the end for Q&A. Please, if you have any questions, post them in the Q&A, not in the chat. Anything you want to say, put in the chat otherwise. David, you have the floor.
Thanks, Mick. Hello to everyone who's come along to this meeting and to the other participants. Thanks for inviting me. As you say, Mick, I have a connection with Scotland, being a Scottish person and having worked at the universities of Strathclyde and Stirling. But prior to that, of course, and it's relevant because Muir is about to speak, I was at the University of Glasgow. I did my undergraduate degree there in biology and my PhD in sociology at the rather well-known Glasgow University Media Group, which I retain some connections with. So I have some kind of knowledge of the University of Glasgow, and I've recently written about the University of Glasgow's appalling behaviour in relation to a journal article by Jane Jackman, a former PhD student from Exeter University, whose article on the Israel lobby, a very good article on the Israel lobby, was complained about by the Zionists, and the university that took the absurd decision of adding a new editorial to it 3 years after it had been published, accusing it of being anti-Semitic, which of course it wasn't. And the basis of the judgment that it was anti-Semitic, as I discovered through FOI information, was no more than a casual conversation with a colleague in the same faculty as the person making the investigation, and no basis for the allegation at all. And so Glasgow has a really not a very good reputation for this kind of activity. And there are other cases in Glasgow which we could talk about, and sure Muir will talk about his own case. So I wanted to start by saying that although I'm going to talk in a minute about my own case, that, you know, the point of talking about my own case is just to give another example of the many cases that there are in the universities now of academics who are being targeted, bullied, harassed, intimidated by the Zionist movement. Sorry. On campuses across up and down the country. So I'll talk about my experience, and then I'm going to go on to talk about the other half of this picture. So it's not just that academics are being targeted, it's also that students are being targeted too. And there's a specific targeting underway at present, specifically against the NUS and its incoming president, Haim Bresheeth, who is under enormous threat at present. But I'll come back to that. So the reason I mention all this together is because, of course, this is not just a set of isolated incidents or people who have said things which might be a little bit off color or have the wrong tone, as the liberals like to say. This is because this is an ongoing onslaught by the Zionist movement, directed from occupied Palestine by the state of Israel itself. It's not a question of individual students feeling upset or academics saying things out of line. It's an ongoing onslaught against the left, against Muslims, against the possibility that anyone will stand in solidarity with the Palestinian people, not just in relation to BDS, but in relation to the whole gamut of the crimes of the state of Israel, including, of course, its foundation as a racist endeavor, as we all know. So my case took 3 years. I started at the University of Bristol in September 2018. By February, I gave a lecture, one of my first lectures actually, at the university on Islamophobia, which I rehearsed the ideas I put out in a co-edited book and co-authored article on Islamophobia, which is about the 5 pillars of Islamophobia, where we say that in addition to the backbone of Islamophobia being first pillar, the counterterrorism apparatus, that there are 4 social movements which help to extend Islamophobia and to pressure conservative states like the UK state to go further and further in their Islamophobic activities. And one of those pillars, we said, is the Zionist movement, parts of the Zionist movement. And it was that which got me the attention of the Zionist movement in the form of the Community Security Trust, an organization which likes to style itself as being a defender of Jews against racism, but which is in actual fact an organization which runs point for the Israeli regime and purposefully blurs together anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, has done from the moment it was founded, but is feeling freer and freer since the onslaught on Corbyn to demonize and harass and intimidate anti-Zionists. The CST, it's important to give you these details because I'm going to come back to them with the NUS. The CST then, when it couldn't have its complaint taken forward because it was a third party, not being a student or an academic at the university, then briefed the National Union of Jewish Students, which of course is itself a Zionist organization, being formally signed up to the Zionist movement through the World Union of Jewish Students, which is of course an affiliate member of the World Zionist Organization. It briefed them to get involved, but of course that wasn't going to be good enough either, because the Union of Jewish Students president, who co-wrote the letter, wasn't a student at Bristol at the time. So they had to also get involved the then president of the Jewish Society at Bristol, which is one of the Jewish societies around the country which is affiliated to the UJS, as indeed are all Jewish societies in this country affiliated to the UJS, and thus formally also Zionist organizations. So they recruited her to sign the letter, co-sign the letter. They wrote the letter, she co-signed it. Her name, of course, is Nina Friedman, and we will come back to her shortly. She's currently the president of the Union of Jewish Students, and has been involved shamefully in attacking Haim Bresheeth, the incoming NUS president, but I'll come back to that later. So the CST recruited the UGS, who recruited the Bristol JSOC. They then made complaints about me. The complaints were judged by an external QC who ruled that not a comma, clause, sentence, or paragraph I had ever written was anti-Semitic, and there was no case to answer. The case was therefore rejected after 2 years. And then 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later probably, I made some comments in an online meeting like this where I referred to having been attacked and complained about by the president of the Bristol JSOC, Neil Friedman, and the then president of the UGS, Hannah Rose. And it was that comment which in the end got me sacked. I mean, effectively, the investigation of me was very detailed and ran to many, many hundreds of pages, but it was essentially the use of the word attacked which got me fired. It's kind of similar to your case, Mick, where you said entirely innocent words about Gaza. And they said that it wasn't so much that I'd used the word attacked, but it was the way in which, it was the manner in which I had used the word attacked, which was vitriolic and was unacceptable, and thus breached university guidelines somehow, even though I wasn't at work at the time, and the guidelines don't affect people who aren't at work. So that was the process. And so eventually in October of last year, they sacked me. And that was the accomplishment, not just of the CST and the UGS, as I've outlined, but also of a whole series of Israel lobby groups. A number of hundreds of MPs and members of the House of Lords signed letters against me, who were brought together by the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Anti-Semitism, which, in case people who are in this meeting aren't aware, is an organisation funded by Zionists, and a whole list of other Zionist organizations, the Zionist Federation, too many organizations to list, and more Zionist organizations than most people know exist in the country, signed letters against me and tried to have me sacked. And eventually they won, they got me sacked. And this is a pattern which they're now aiming to repeat up and down the country. They've tried to do it in a number of different universities. In Leeds, they've tried it. In Warwick, they've tried it. Really significant attacks on a large number of both students and staff at the University of Warwick. In the case of Glasgow, I've mentioned Jane Jackman's case, but also, of course, there's Muir's case, which he will no doubt talk about shortly. And there are a number of other cases which have not become so public, where people have been pressured into resigning or apologizing or any of the number of things that one is supposed to do when one makes comments about Zionism. So that's an ongoing campaign. This is something which the State of Israel, the Zionist regime, is pursuing with vigor, and its pawns, its assets in this country, of which there are many hundreds of organizations, are pursuing it with vim and vigor as well. But what we see, and I suppose this is the main point I would make, is that what we see here is not, when we hear the voices of the Union of Jewish Students or the Community Security Trust or the United Jewish Israel Appeal or the Zionist Federation or any of the other Friends of Israel organizations, what we are hearing is the voice of the government in Tel Aviv. It's the Israeli government who's speaking through these ventriloquist dummies in Zionist organizations. And that goes for my case, that goes for Muir's case, that goes for all the other cases which we're currently seeing. Now, let me go on to mention the other thing I was going to mention, which is the current attempt to destroy the possibility that the legitimately democratically elected president, incoming president of the NUS, to destroy the possibility that she should be installed in place, even before she's installed in place. With the previous example, where they had a problem with the first Black Muslim woman to be elected as president of the NUS, people will remember Malia Boatia. They weren't able to remove her before she was elected, but they were able to confine her to one term of office by the subversions that they enacted upon her, subversions which are, of course, everyone knows, well documented in the 2017 Al Jazeera program, The Lobby, where with undercover filming, it showed that there were people inside the NUS, vice presidents to Mali as president, who were supposed to be working for her and with her, who conspired to undermine her and to defame her and to intimidate her. And they were successful in the end in confining her term to 1 term of office. Now, what they hope to do is to have Shema removed before she even gets into office. And there is a massive attempt to carry through what appears to be a coup inside NUS. So the NUS just the other day issued a statement saying that it was going to investigate anti-Semitism in the NUS. It was going to appoint an independent outside person. There was going to be an independent investigation. And in the same breath, they said they were going to ask advice from the Union of Jewish Students for who should be appointed to head this independent investigation, thus meaning, of course, that it's not going to be an independent investigation. The Union of Jewish Students is not a disinterested party there to defend ordinary Jewish students. The UJS is a signed up Zionist organization which will always defend the state of Israel, right or wrong. And that's the fact of the matter. What the Zionists are trying to say is that no, the Union of Jewish Students and indeed ordinary Jewish societies are not, they're there for all Jewish students. They represent all Jewish students. Any Jewish student can join. And that's, of course, there's a technical term in sociology for that, and it's called a lie. And if you look at their code of conduct, if you look at their constitution, you can see very clearly, it's not just that they're signed up to supporting Israel and all that in the constitution, which of course they are, but that they are able to, the conditions of membership of the organization are such that if you don't sign up, you're not allowed to join. That's the technical conditions in their own constitution. At the same time as on their website, they say, all Jewish students are welcome. 2 minutes left, yeah, sure. Okay, so the Union of Jewish Students is a fraud. It's a lie to say that they are there to represent all Jewish students. They are a Zionist organization through and through and cannot be anything other than a Zionist organization until and unless they resile from the Jerusalem program of the World Zionist Organization, which the World Union of Jewish Students signed up to in 1979. And they could remove themselves from that, which would stop them being a Zionist organization, in which case they could have a better claim to represent all Jewish students, but they don't currently do that. They represent pro-Israel students, and they represent pro-Israel students in a very clear ideological way. Now, this campaign against Shema is an absolute disgrace to the student movement. The student body in this country has elected a Black Muslim president, and the Zionists want to remove her, want to undermine the very basis of NUS democracy and bring the NUS effectively to heel, as does the government. The government are working in concert with the Zionists on this occasion, as in many other examples one could mention. And so I wanted to highlight that what we see here is an attempted coup to undermine all of student democracy and to render the whole idea of democracy in the student movement as simply a joke. And we need to defend Shema, of course. Let's have no illusions, however, that's going to be an easy process. The NUS has already outlined a process whereby they will conclude that the NUS has significant problems of structural anti-Semitism, and they'll cite Shema and they'll cite Loki, the rapper who was invited to perform at their 100th anniversary event just the other week, and then they said that he had pulled out. Well, again, that was a lie. He didn't pull out. He was bumped because the Zionists pressured the organization. So let's entertain no illusions about the ability to be successful here, but therefore let's concentrate on what the real issue is here. That what we're seeing here is an effort by the state of Israel to directly undermine the possibility of student democracy in this country. People will say it's the UJS doing this. Well, no, the UJS is the state of Israel. It's not just that they're pawns or assets, that they are the ventriloquist dummy of the state of Israel. And I'll leave you with that. You're muted, Rick.
Sorry, David, thanks for taking us down the rabbit hole where you're disciplined for using the word attack and saying it in a wrong way. You must give us lessons on how to use it in a good way to avoid this in future. Well, look, David's fighting back, and he will not give in. Jeremy Corbyn gave in and capitulated and tried to appease his attackers. David's not going to do that. Everybody here can help. I know he's got a crowdfunder. I'm raising this issue, not him, but he's got a crowdfunding campaign because he now goes to an industrial tribunal, and getting a cracking barrister doesn't come cheaply. But we don't leave him behind. Either the women in the students' union, whose name escapes me, that David mentioned, we don't leave them behind to fight on their own, because after they deal with them, they'll be coming for some of us. So, David, can I ask you to put the details of the crowdfunder in the chat?
Yeah.
Can I ask everybody to take it away? And however modest the donation, it's a donation. We're in the same trenches. Muir Houston is now in the crosshairs up in Glasgow University. Muir, do you want to talk about your case, what you want to say about it? And I believe you're of a mind that we should not just be eternally defending ourselves. We really need to go on the offensive against these malicious and vexatious attacks. Muir Houston from Glasgow University. Dr. Houston.
Thank you very much, Mick, for that introduction, and thank you, David, for your talk. As I go through my talk, you will see there is connections between myself and David cases. But I've been an academic at Glasgow University for more than 13 years. Before that, I had positions at the University of Stirling and the University of Paisley, and I returned to academia as a mature student. I've always been a bit of an activist, and in Chomsky's terms, being a public intellectual, I like to ensure that I provide students with alternative views, and therefore outside my office you will see posters, flyers for various progressive movements challenging mainstream views on a number of topics. And one of the posters which I had on my wall was a cartoon by a Palestinian cartoonist, which depicted the mainstream media bias in the coverage of the Palestinian conflict. And I'll just share my screen to show you the original cartoon here. And there we have the cartoon. The Arabic script reads Western media. The complaint against me was that this, firstly, it was a blood libel, they claimed, because presumably the Palestinians are in pieces. And then it was later said to be a trope about Jewish control of the world media. I defended myself saying it was not. It was about the mainstream media bias in the coverage of the conflict, well researched and noted by not only academics but others as well. Professor at Glasgow has 2 books on the subject. So somebody complained about this poster. We denied it was in any way anti-Semitic, and I thought that was the end of it. However, after signing a letter in support of David Miller and tweeting my support from my private Twitter account, where there was no mention of my employment at Glasgow University, I began to get trolled on Twitter, mentioning my employer, the University of Glasgow, the SRC, Funding Council and other organisations I had worked for, questioning whether I was a true and fit person to be employed by them, simply by signing a statement and a letter in support of David. I then received an email several months after this, and while David's case was still ongoing, from a student journalist from a private email account asking for noting that I'd signed the letter in support of David Miller and asking if I would like to comment on it. I checked the reporter's previous posts, and it was fairly clear that she had an agenda. And so I retweeted, and I'll share this tweet with you. The tweet from Vanessa Billy. Well, how odd. Jewish Chronicle just contacted me in relation to support Miller with a number of usual to be prepared to be smeared questions. And as you'll see, the Jewish Chronicle come back into my story later on, and I retweeted replied to Vanessa saying, after signing a letter in support of David Miller, a member of the student lobby, given their previous reporting, I will decline. If I can just, did you see that? No.
Not yet.
Hold on a minute. Sorry. There we go. So this was Vanessa Billy, who has smeared many times for her work on the OPCW report on chemical weapons in Syria and various other narratives in the East. So this was the context I responded to. The Jewish Chronicle, as we will see, plays a part in my story, but simple response from that. This then got me in further trouble, because apparently the terms the lobby and the terms the student lobby, when applied to in relating to anything to do with Israel, is deemed anti-Semitic by some people. Again, this was challenged. In the meantime, though, at Glasgow, I'd spoken out forcefully at Senate, which is the governing body of the university, against the adoption of the IHRA. And it is my mind that this widespread adoption of the IHRA, a document which is not intended to be used the way it is now being used, has meant that many academics, as David has attested, and I know in a number of cases myself, are now scared to speak out about Palestine or against the Israeli regime. At the moment, I'm still under investigation, so there's only so much I can say about that at the moment, but I'm waiting for the outcome of a disciplinary hearing into my conduct, which was found by an investigating committee of anonymous experts to be anti-Semitic. So this is where I am at the moment. This has been going on for over 2 years, this campaign against me. It's resulted in me being off work for over 8 weeks with work-related stress directly as a consequence of these attacks upon me. And is certainly silencing other academics I know, having seen what happened to me. It all came to a head recently with a publication in January in the Jewish Chronicle, which then appeared in other Zionist-funded supporting magazines, including one called Glamour, a women's magazine. I don't know why I managed to get in that one, but the Jewish Chronicle article was then reprinted in the Jerusalem Post and also the Allgemeiner. So basically my reputation has been trashed. It doesn't matter, even if I overcome these charges and I'm found innocent of them. Any search for my name, as I invite you to do just now, and you will see some of the smear attacks that have been made against me. David also mentioned the case of the Journal article by Jane Jackman. There was also the Somdeep Sen, a distinguished Palestinian academic, I think from Roskilde University, who they wanted to, because they didn't like, the Jewish Society didn't like his book and his views, they wanted to vet his presentation, which Somdeep refused to do. So Glasgow is becoming a kind of not very safe place for pro-Palestinian activities and anti-Zionist views. As I said, I've tried to keep what's been going on in the public domain, and as I say, if you have not already seen them, Google my name and see what kind of stuff has been written about me. So that's really all I want to say at the moment. Just I see something in the chat. Yes, Edinburgh University is pushing back strongly against the IHRA at the moment. Glasgow, we're trying to do something, but it doesn't seem to be having any traction at all. So thank you, and happy to answer any questions of that later on once we've heard from Haim. So thank you very much for listening and attending.
Thanks, Muir. Okay, so it's deeper down the rabbit hole. David gets done for using the word attack in an improper way. And Muir is threatened with discipline for signing a letter, I think with hundreds of other people, in support of David. Final contributor tonight is Haim Bresheeth. Haim, I greatly enjoyed your book, and I'm like no others. I know you're active in the Jewish Network for Palestine. Why are you hanging out with such a bunch of Jew haters?
Well, let's go back a little bit so that I hope I can clarify why David is such an important target for those racists. I want to say before I start my presentation that I'm now involved in defending 3 cases in 3 different universities in Britain. And I'm sure before long there will be others. And I've done so in the past. So there is a growing number of people who need our support. And it's very important that we do that in the most decided way, because you'll see from my presentation what we're facing, I hope. The background goes back to the 1980s. I won't tell you everything because there's no time, but if I can share with you my presentation. You can see from the name of the presentation that it's related to, can you see it?
Yes, clearly.
Basically David's area of work is a very important part of what I'm discussing. Now, I want to talk briefly about what is called the new anti-Semitism, because this is where it all comes from. Now, this is supposedly residing in a new combination of radical left-wing groups, Islamic radicals, and European right-wing fascists. This is what a very large number of Jewish Zionist academics have worked out as the new anti-Semitism. Now, let me tell you that both my parents were resident in Auschwitz for over a year. And before that, they have suffered a decade of anti-Semitism at least. And nobody had to explain to them or give them definitions of what anti-Semitism was. But now we need definition of anti-Semitism exactly because we need to bring people like Muir and David into disrepute, and myself, of course, and Mick, and many thousands of Jews on the left and many others on the left who have fought racism all their life are now denounced as anti-Semites. So this combination of groups, which you can see is totally nonsensical, is supposedly the new anti-Semitism base. Now, sorry. I can hardly see it. Now, the new right in Europe is clearly making a huge effort to support Israel. So they cannot be part of anti-Semitism, of course. But the irony is that these are anti-Semitic regimes. The regime in Hungary, the regime in Poland, and the regime in the Ukraine, headed by a Jew, are basically anti-Semitic. In the case of Ukraine, part of the army, a very important part of the army, is anti-Semitic and of course, Nazi. So there are very strange developments. Now, what we are asked to believe is this. This is the new basis for the imaginary alliance, which never existed and cannot exist between those. And what combines and connects them is the new anti-Semitism, supposedly. Now, I want to give you some quotes from the prophets of new anti-Semitism. Tazhieff is, I think, the main prophet. But before he wrote, some Americans in the 70s and 80s did very similar things. So what is he talking about? This recent wave of Judeophobia is part of a discourse of ideas designed to attack Jews and mobilize action against them that has been spreading throughout the world. Well, I have never noticed it until now. I'm not that young, but I have never noticed this, but there we are. We find in discourse a number of words and themes handed down from various anti-Jewish traditions, but also new indictments in which Israel and Zionism serve as repulsive myths. To get to the heart of the matter, we might say that its general form of argument is as follows. Jews are all more or less crypto-Zionists. Zionism is a form of colonialism, imperialism, and racism. Therefore, Jews are colonialist, imperialist, and racist, whether overt or not. Now, I ask you to be the judges of this ironic quote. Are Jews more or less crypto-Zionists? I think most Jews in this country are not crypto-Zionists, but Zionists. Zionism is a form of colonialism, imperialism, and racism. Is it or is it not? If you think that Zionism has nothing to do with imperialism, racism, and colonialism, and they found themselves in an empty country and never did the Nakba, and never got rid of 2/3 of the Palestinians, and they run a totally democratic country which is not racist and in no way acts against the Palestinians that don't exist, of course, then of course you will see the point of Tazhieff and his work. But it doesn't end there. By presenting Zionism as the incarnation of absolute evil, an anti-Zionist vision of the world reconstituted itself in the second half of the 20th century. Now, this is, for my money, a parallel reality, because I haven't noticed this either. What I have noticed is that Zionism is supported by every single regime you can think of. So go back to the quote, like the old anti-Semitism, in the strong sense of the term, it is characterized by an absolute hatred of Jews as representatives of a single intrinsically negative entity or exemplars of an evil force. That is a total hatred in which Jews are considered in themselves as endowed with malign essence. I have lived in Britain for almost 50 years. I have never met a single person that voiced this. I have never met a single person that voiced anything similar in any country I visited. Obviously, Tazhieff moves in different circles. And another star of this movement is Bernard-Henri Lévy, who actually expanded and extended the anti-Semitism definition. French anti-Semitism, that political passion whose appearance, it is worth constant reminder, dates from the French fascist current of the 1930s, that ideological delirium which poorly conceals such dubious sentiment as the hatred of American democracy à la Tocqueville, the fantasy of cosmopolitan country living under the law of the Jewish lobby, French anti-Americanism then attracts the worst, and its seductions will be all the more dangerous if a symbolic restraining blow from above does not very quickly oppose it. Now, this is a very complex text and demands more time, but I would just point out that Henri Levy has just added anti-Americanism to the sentiments which can be called anti-Semitic. Another variant of this amalgam is no less interesting. It is clear that anti-imperialism today is anti-Americanism. Anti-Americanism is evidently anti-capitalism, and anti-capitalism via the classic fantasy figure of the Jewish financier is anti-Semitic. So just think about this nonsense. I mean, I have never read, Henri Levy and all his colleagues are very serious academics, supposedly. He has supported the bombing of Libya, and he's supporting war in Ukraine against Russia. Now, look at what he's saying. He's saying that basically anti-Americanism is actually based on anti-capitalism. Anti-capitalism is a classic fantasy of the Jewish financier, and therefore is anti-Semitic. So if you're anti-American, anti-capitalist, or anti-colonialist, you're anti-Semitic. Now, I think that anti-American, anti-colonialist, and anti-capitalist describes most of the academics in this world. So this is where the danger starts. And to the last quote that tells you that this is not about the IHRA. The IHRA is actually the acceptable face of this madness. Not that it is acceptable, but it's actually, this is what is hiding behind the IHRA. And this is how the universities are now reading what people are saying and the manner that they are saying it, as happened to both the speakers before me. Now, another quote, the last one I promised, from Tajiev. Not surprisingly, the accusation may be found in neo-fascist, traditionalist, or fundamentalist Christian circles of the far right. But today, they are mainly pervaded by the propagandists of political or radical Islam, the various currents of Islamism or Islam radicalism, by the humanitarian neo-Christian movement, which in its twin demonization of America and Israel is succeeding revolutionary anti-imperialist third worldism, by a section of the elite, and both left and right, liberal and social democratic, which advocates moving beyond the nation state and preaches the messianic utopia of post-national world, etc., etc. And of course, it comes to the main thing. By the new anti-imperialists coming from a communist or leftist anarcho-Trotskyist tradition, who tend to reduce their struggle against neoliberal globalization to a simplistic and anti-Americanism, and of course, the whole of the Arab world, whose constituent dictatorship and reactionary plutocratic regimes are looking for ways of deflecting mass anger onto external enemies and have cynically made the Palestinians' cause the absolute cause, etc., etc. Now, let me just remind you, when you look at this, that the whole of the Arab world, for all intents and purposes, is a signatory to agreements which are against the Palestinians with Israel. Basically, the Arab world has abandoned the Palestinians ever since 1973. And now they have made it into the Abraham Accords. So not only are the Palestinians abandoned by the West, that never supported them, abandoned by most of the third world, which has supported them, abandoned by a communist movement that doesn't exist anymore, but they are abandoned by their brethren in the Arab world. So these fantasies, which are projected on the world in a way that presenting a world that doesn't exist at all, are very interesting. So just to end, what is included in the new anti-Semitism or in the IHRA? Criticism of Israel. You're not allowed to criticize Israel because it's Jewish. For example, if you criticize Saudi Arabia for killing critics of it and boiling them in acid in foreign embassies, would you be would you be Islamophobic? I don't think so. You would be criticizing a country, a state, a regime for being inhumane and criminal. This is what we're doing with Israel. Anti-Zionists are criticizing Israel for being what it is, not for being Jewish. So this is the first one. The second one, anti-Americanism. Why? Because anti-Americanism is a cover for anti-Semitism. It is supposedly another form of being anti-Semitic. Then the opposition to capitalism. Why? Because a lot of Jews are capitalists, and this is a form of anti-Semitism. Is a critique of capitalism anti-Semitic? Then we can't really teach anything at all. We can't teach history. We can't teach most of the topics in political studies. And the best thing is that anti-colonialism is also a form of anti-Semitism. So we cannot actually teach anything about the history of this country, the biggest colonial power that ever existed. And indeed, an anti-Semitic power that did, because of anti-Semitism, passed the legislation in 1905 that we know very well about. Now, our Prime Minister has also published a book called 72 Virgins, which includes forms of words which actually are clearly anti-Semitic, but he is not, I don't think, facing sacking for anti-Semitism. Britain has a lot to answer for. And then, apparently, according to those academics I quoted, criticism of the media is also anti-Semitic because a lot of Jews work in the media. And of course, finance, it stands to reason that you can't criticize finance because Jews work in finance. So you can't criticize anybody and anything. Now, to end, I want to say that what they are describing is one thing. What we see in, and this is, I think, where David's work is so important and comes into the picture. This is what we have, a Xyophilic Islamophobia Alliance, where Israel is working with the alt-right and the far-right and its Western allies. I think you can see this very clearly now in the campaign in Ukraine, where Israel is becoming one of the negotiators, a country that occupies another country and another people for 74 years and refuses all UN resolutions on the topic, is now supposedly helping to negotiate peace between another occupier and the Ukrainians. This is far beyond words could describe it. Now, I think I want to end here by saying that what we in Jewish Network for Palestine are doing against this is we decided that apart from the focused work that we're doing to help people like David and Muir, we are at the moment about to launch, and you can see on the 8th of May, a new initiative, a new political initiative, which is called Convivencia for Just Peace. This is going back to historical models of Jews, Christians, and Muslims living together for hundreds and even over 1,000 years, and living in peace and harmony outside of Europe. Europe is where modern racism is developed, and has reached its apotheosis in the Holocaust. And the Europeans are trying to make sure that we never remember or talk about it. But actually, both anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, and of course, other forms of racism are European products through and through. So we are now offering people an historical memory and a political horizon emanated from it, which is based on fighting the lies of Zionism. Zionism is part of an Islamophobic world movement. In Britain and in Europe, what we are suffering is not a growth of anti-Semitism. Thankfully, you know, there is anti-Semitism. It's not David, it's not me, it's not the PSC who are anti-Semitic. Some right-wing people are anti-Semitic and probably will always be as long as the right is allowed to operate in the way that it does. But what we are suffering from now is very severe, growing and toxic Islamophobia. And that's why David was targeted. And this is why we need to help him, because in fighting Islamophobia, we are also fighting anti-Semitism. We're fighting the move against the refugees from the Middle East, and we're fighting all forms of racism. We don't need codes to tell us what racism is. Racism is racial hatred of people because of who they are and not of what they're doing. So I hope that you will all join the movements against the IHRA, against the Zionist silencing of the debate on Palestine, and support in the different ways those lecturers who lost their jobs and those many who are still going to lose their jobs because of this toxic movement. Thank you.
Thanks, Chaim. Chaim's our third and last speaker. Questions which they, I hope, will factor into their responses when they come back. Naomi's asking about trade unions. Are any trade unions taking a stand against the IHRA, for example? And are they even standing up to people being sacked for these disgraceful reasons? And Helen comes in and asks, what's the best way of building solidarity to challenge these attacks? I don't know the rounded answer to the last one, but one key way is, of course, to start to organise to swing behind David Miller, who is in the front line of not just the attack, not just being attacked, but fighting back. We've stood on ground before where we found, for example, Jeremy Corbyn began to placate his enemy, began to appease his enemies, began to throw his comrades under the bus, thinking that that might appease them. It never did. David's not going to do that. You can pile in with support, and money is a measure of support, not the only, but it's a measure of support in order to make a difference. I've got a question which I hope the three guests will answer, taking into account those two sub-questions about trade unions and the best way of building solidarity. I'm old enough to have been involved in a campaign against the war in Vietnam, and as they killed 1 million, the meetings were pretty small. It was never big enough. But then the repression came, and the free speech movement in California was a response to an attempt to have meetings on campus on the issue of Vietnam. So the free speech movement, it was the actual attempt to suppress free speech and the fight against it, which raised the whole campaign against the war in Vietnam to a quantitatively higher level. Do the speakers think that this is not just a big threat, but could it also present the same opportunity by embracing the issue, by struggling on the issue of free speech, to raise the whole question of Palestine to a higher level? I'll take the three speakers in the same order, if I may. Come on in, David, if you're still there, and answer and chip in response to those points, if you would, and then I'll take David and then Haim.
Sorry, I missed a bit about Vietnam.
You weren't even listening. That's just terrible. I was listening to you, and you weren't even listening to me. The question is this, David. The repression on the issue of Vietnam university authorities in some places banned all meetings on the question of Vietnam.
Yeah.
The free speech movement was a response to that, and it raised the whole issue of Vietnam to a higher level. Can we learn something about that in terms of the repression now on the issue of Palestine?
I don't know enough about the history of the free speech movement. I mean, it started in Berkeley. I know a little bit about it, but the difficulty is that free speech movements currently in this country are not up to the job. Really, we need a movement which targets directly full frontal targeting of Zionism as racism, because the free speech, we'll not get there with free speech otherwise. We'll end up with a kind of argument about whether we should be encouraging free speech in Israel-Palestine, which allows some kind of balance or engagement with Zionists, and there's no possibility of any progress in that regard. What we see in recent weeks in relation, for example, to Cambridge University and its student union attacking the PALSOC, Palestine Solidarity movement, the committee there in Cambridge, and condemning people who have described the JSOC, the Jewish Society, as being an Israel lobby group, and saying that that's anti-Semitism. Well, no, it's not. These are Israel lobby groups. These are Zionist organizations. Let's use the Z word. They don't want us to use the Z word. They want us to say the Israeli government is bad or has done bad things, or what they're doing in Al-Aqsa is reprehensible. But as soon as we say, yes, that's true, but also it's the Zionist movement. There's a worldwide movement which is devoted to supporting the misdeeds of the occupiers in Palestine. And that's why, for example, Jessica Elgott, who's the chief political correspondent of The Guardian, says this in a recent Board of Deputies online meeting. She says, we shouldn't be using the word Zionism. No, it's bad. Because what they want us to do is to have as much criticism of the human rights record of the Israeli government, but not to say a word about the pawns, assets, and ventriloquist dummies of the Israeli state in this country. And I said before, there are many organizations. People don't know how many Zionist organizations there are. Let me be even more explicit about that. I would divide the Zionist movement into formal and informal Zionist organizations. The formal Zionist organizations are those which have a direct membership in organizations which are part of the World Zionist Organization. And the informal ones are the ones that don't have such a direct membership. The informal ones are all the Friends of Israel groups, from the Confederation in Scotland through to Sussex Friends in Brighton, the Labour Friends of Israel, Conservative Friends of Israel, the Community Security Trust. I can go on and on, right? There's hundreds of them, right? And the foundations which support them. And that's the informal Zionist movement, right? The formal Zionist movement in this country has hundreds of members. I don't believe there's anybody in this country who has a list of how many there are, because there are so many. Now, that's something which has to be directly targeted. It's not enough to say, oh, the Israeli government does this bad things in Al-Aqsa. And let's be clear, they are doing very, very bad things in Al-Aqsa at this minute. And that needs to be stopped. But the hundreds of organizations in this country are there to distract us, to pretend that there's nothing going on, to talk about something else. What's that other thing they talk about? Oh yes, anti-Semitism, the real and pressing problem for Jews in this country. There is no such real and pressing problem for Jews in this country. It doesn't exist. The only place you get anti-Semitism in this country is in the far depths of the far right, the parts of the far right which has not gone over to supporting Zionism. And there's very few of them. How many of them are there? A handful. There is no problem of anti-Semitism in this country of any significant nature. There is a problem of anti-Palestinian racism. There is a problem of Islamophobia, and these are being neglected as a deliberate strategy by the Zionists. And it's the Zionists who are doing this. It's not just the Israeli government. It's not the Israeli government just who are encouraging the anti-Semitism which it's Zionist groups in this country who are acting on behalf of, as pawns of, as foreign agents of the Israeli state, and they are the ones who need to be targeted, to be de-Zionized. They can all be de-Zionized tomorrow. They can all tell us that they've left the World Zionist Organization. They've signed off from the Jerusalem program, and they are no longer Zionist organizations. They're just there to represent Jews. Bang, fantastic. But how many of them have done that in the last decade, 2 decades? Not a single one. Not a single one. There's plenty of time for them to do this still. They can still do it, but we're not seeing that. And that's why we have to target the Zionist movement, front and center of any movement, and say this: Zionism is racism. It can never be anything else but racism. It's irredeemably racist, and it needs to be ended. Like, every single organization either de-Zionized or dismantled and ended. So that's my 2 pence worth on the strategy, right? We've not really got a lot of support for that position at present, but really it's the only way to take them on. The only way is to recognize what the enemy we face, and that is a racist, irredeemably, irreducibly racist movement of Zionism.
Thanks, David. I totally concur. Muir, do you want to come?
Yeah, I'll just come in on a bit on the trade union and the support I've had. I see there's a post in the chat by Les to know me. I mean, certainly throughout this, I've been supported very well by my caseworker, who was a very senior figure in the Glasgow UCU. But as Les says, and while the UCU has came out and challenged the adoption of the IHRA, some branches and some institutions are pushing back slightly more than others. Some haven't accepted it at all. But as I mentioned earlier, I think at Edinburgh University, there's a very strong movement there against it, and they published a powerful letter with testimonies from students and academics about their fear of becoming engaged or being publicly known as pro-Palestinian. But again, these things need more uptake at the national level. But as I say, there are some groups. There is a group at Glasgow as well working in the background to try and push back against the IHRA adoption, which, as I say, is being used as a cover, if you like, to foment charges of anti-Semitism against students and academics. Thanks.
Haim?
I don't want to repeat what my 2 colleagues have said, all of which I'm in agreement with, of course, but to mention that both main parties are now run by Zionists. In this country, I mean, are run by Zionists, by self-confessed Zionists, yeah? And that means that no member of either the Labour Party, the so-called Labour Party, because it's no longer has a right to bear that name as far as I'm concerned. I've resigned from it in disgust on the occasion of them getting rid of Ken Loach as an anti-Semite. Can you imagine that? So the 2 main parties are spoken for. The other 2 parties, the Lib Dems and the Greens, are also Zionists. There are struggles within them, especially in the Green Party, but it is actually a supporter, as are all those 4 parties of the IHRA and of Israel. So we have a situation where there is no freedom of speech politically. There is no freedom of speech in the media. I don't need to repeat what the BBC is doing every day. In the 74 years of the occupation of Palestine, there was never so much said for Palestine as was said in a month of the Ukraine war, supporting Ukraine. I ask you why that is. I ask you why, there are a lot of people that were ejected from Ukraine. This is not good. But 2/3 of the Palestinians were rejected by Zionism in 1948. So if this is a wrong thing to do, why can't we speak about it? Why can't we say, this is what Zionism does? It's not a question of what it says only. It is what it does and what it always did. And for 74 years, we are not allowed to say this, to teach it. And now we're not even allowed to say it on social media at the danger of losing our job. You know, when you speak in a totally different context even, not to your students, of course, you can't say the truth to your students about anything anymore. So I think that what we are fighting for when we talk about the freedom of speech to speak about Palestine, Israel, is we're talking about freedom of speech per se. We are fighting for freedom of speech to have the freedom to speak about anything, about, as I've proven to you, I hope, about capitalism, about colonialism, about the way, the corrupt way which government run. So we're not asking you just to join the campaign to support Palestine, but to support democracy and to support the freedom of speech, because they are one and the same thing.
I'm going to ask each of our three speakers to make some concluding remarks. Can you factor in a question from Amina, who asks, is there a network, David partly answered it, is there a network or organization to turn to when one is at the receiving end of an attack from Zionists? Or is this just, is this overly defensive? Well, you can join Amina's Scottish Palestine Solidarity Campaign branch in Glasgow. That's one possibility, and there are others. But look, here's my question, if you could reply to it, each of you, if that's not too presumptuous. The EU apologized to Israel for the opinions of EU citizens after they conducted a poll, and they found that Israel was deeply unpopular. 59% of EU citizens from Eastern Europe to Dublin said that Israel was the greatest threat to world peace. Scalded, Franco Frattini, the EU foreign minister, promised Israel that the views of European citizens would not be allowed to guide foreign policy. Does that answer the question why they are suppressing the debate and the discussion? Is it because to a very substantial degree they've already lost it? I'll take Muir, Haim, and finally David. But your own concluding remarks, of course.
I mean, just to follow on from what you said there, Mick, I think the increase in popular support for Palestine during the last kind of bombings and attacks on by the Israelis frightened in some way, or took them aback a wee bit, because there was a lot of support for Palestine from quarters that they didn't expect to have. We've also seen them in some countries being very aggressive towards the BDS movement, which is another way that the activists try and operate and try and against the Israeli state through boycott, divestment and sanctions. I know Germany, in certain states in Germany, there have been challenges against the outlawing of BDS, and I think in America various states have various rules and whether even institutions decide whether they can support the BDS movement. But certainly, I mean, I've had a lot of support, I mentioned earlier, from a trade union. I've also had a lot of support specifically from the Scottish Palestine Solidarity Campaign. I've also had a lot of support from academics like David and that. And I think we do have to, as Mick says, I mean, it's many people, it's been a worrying experience for me. But I could maybe say, oh no, I'm sorry about that straight away first. Oh yes, whatever they say. But I wasn't. I was quite convinced I was not being anti-Semitic. I was being anti-Zionist. And I think that we just need to sometimes stand and for our own principles while we're under attack, and support others who are facing these same challenges. Thanks.
Sorry, I'm a serial offender of speaking while muted. Haim.
Well, I think continuing what Muir has said, BDS is really the heart of the struggle. And things are now changing. For a decade or two, we have been told in Europe, in, well, everywhere actually, but in the West, that BDS is illegal, immoral, illogical, that we couldn't actually operate in this way. And I want to say two things about this denial of BDS, the right to BDS. One, I spent many years fighting for the end of apartheid in South Africa. And how was it done? It was done through BDS, supporting the armed struggle inside South Africa by the ANC. And BDS brought about the end of apartheid in South Africa. We should never forget that, even if we don't think that they've done it, you know, very well in South Africa, because I have criticisms of the way in which, you know, equality actually still is denied to the Black people of South Africa. However, let's also talk about what is happening now. The whole West has organized in record time to apply BDS of a kind that has never been applied or even conceived of against Russia. Now, basically, Russia is in this war because of the West, because of NATO, because of the breaking of promises. I'm not supporting the war that Russia is holding. I'm not supporting any war, but I'm saying what has happened here. The West has at first caused the war and then moved in against the invading nation with BDS. At the same time that for decades it is fighting against BDS in Palestine. Why? Why is this racism allowed to dictate everything that happens in the West with Palestine? Because the West is racist, because the West is colonialist, because the West is imperialist. It has invented and run the empires and colonies for many decades, well, for more than 100 years. So we should never stop reminding people, especially in Britain, of those facts. And BDS now has become something that we can and should demand. We should demand equality and parity with the treatment of Russia and the treatment of Israel. There is so much that combines them, much more than what separates them, in the issue of occupation and killing of civilians. And the killing of Palestinian civilians has been going on for 74 years. So what are we waiting for? Let's move on it now.
Thanks, Haim. David, you got the last word, apart from a few announcements afterwards.
Okay, I'm going to disagree with Haim there. I mean, I think that there is no comparison between the sanctions on Russia and the question of sanctioning Israel. Purely from the position of saying that one does not want the working class of this country to be assaulted with the impact of those sanctions on Russia, I would oppose the sanctions, purely on those grounds alone. These sanctions are the West in a fit of crazy overconfidence, shooting itself in the foot. Yeah, I mean, the idea that you can sanction the country which produces the most wheat in the world, on which 40% of the oil and gas used in the European Union comes from, is bonkers, right? It's completely crazy. And it will have an impact. Of course, it will have an impact on the hedge funds and on those who depend on the dollar, the rich, the people who we wanted to have an impact on, but it will have a much bigger impact on the working class in this country and indeed in America and in all European countries. It's a disaster for ordinary people in this country. And on those grounds alone, never mind geopolitical grounds, I would oppose sanctions on Russia. It's a completely disastrous and foolish attempt to constrain the Russian state. it will work. The Russians are already winning. They will win in Ukraine. I see British intelligence people are on the radio today saying, oh, well, Putin thought that he was going to win Mariupol much more quickly. Well, no, that's exactly not what's happened in Mariupol. Now, I don't want to go off on a rant on Ukraine because we're not talking about that. But, targeting the state of Israel, yes, we must do that. Yes, we do it through BDS. BDS, though, let's not be overconfident here. BDS will not by itself bring the liberation of Palestine. What will bring the liberation of Palestine is the people of Palestine. And they are already moving towards that historic goal. We 3 or 4 years ago, back to 2009, 2014, the assaults in Gaza, the resistance was disunified. The resistance is not disunified now. The resistance is not only united inside occupied Palestine, meaning the whole of 48 Palestine and the territories they've subsequently taken, but the resistance is also integrated into the axis of resistance with Ansar Allah in Yemen, with Nasrallah and Hezbollah in Lebanon, with the resistance and the popular mobilization squads in Iraq, with the Iranians, with Syria. This is the beginning of the end of the settler colony in Palestine. And we should be supporting that. Yes, BDS will help with that, but let's not fool ourselves. BDS will not be the cutting edge of the liberation of Palestine. The cutting edge will be the resistance of the people inside Palestine. And they're already shaping up for that. And I see, we see every day the unconscionable acts of the state of Israel, of the settlers attempting to, have you seen this, the images of this? The settlers trying to smuggle young goats into Al-Aqsa to sacrifice them for Passover. I mean, it's truly extraordinary. And, red lines are being crossed here, and red lines being crossed will result in a response from Hamas, from the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, from the PFLP, and from the other resistance factions. And make no mistake, that will be happening soon. And the Israelis are in a weaker position than perhaps they have ever been. They don't perhaps recognize that, but that is the case. I think, the single thing I would point back to from last May and the resistance activities then was the way in which settlers evacuated from Lid. There's a small proportion of the population of Lid, which is Palestinian, which was not expelled in 1948, and they came out in the streets and the settlers left. I don't think that's happened before. And that's the future, is that settlers will leave. They will be forced to leave by Palestinian intifada. And that's, of course, the way it will happen. It will not happen just by us boycotting. That might help. But what will happen is the resistance will win in Palestine. And that's what we should be supporting.
Thanks, David. BDS is an auxiliary force apart. We don't know how much, but it certainly can reduce the cost of freedom for the Palestinians, which will be extremely high, but BDS and Solidarity can reduce it by an amount that we'll never know, but it can reduce it.
We should do it, of course, yes, absolutely.
We're inside the heart of the beast, yeah. Friends, can you share your slides, Haim? Somebody's asking for that. Give us your details. Folk would like to get in touch. You've sparked some serious interest here in taking action. I would only add this. I mentioned earlier how deeply unpopular Israel is. I think the Palestinian resistance has already won a gigantic victory, and that in the court of public opinion around the world. And that's the backcloth against which we're seeing the repression of pro-Palestinian ideas. If these ideas weren't popular, if these ideas didn't resonate, they wouldn't ban us, they would just laugh at us, right? They would ignore us, we'd be marginal. So the repression is necessary. A tribute to all of you listening and viewing. You do know that the US Congress, I don't know the fate of the bill, but it had got a majority of senators and a lot of Congress people to put a $1 million fine and maybe a 10 or 20-year sentence on active BDS campaigners. So to send us a message. Friends, thanks for joining. Thanks to our three speakers. Each of you have really contributed. We will stand together. If we don't hang together, we'll hang separately. Join Scottish Palestine Solidarity Campaign. Sign up to our daily post in the chat. A big thanks again to the three speakers, and a big thanks to everybody who has joined us from wherever you have joined us. Thanks again, and good night.